Hello everyone, it's Attacker72 here, and for today, Happy New Year to all my fans who are watching this. It is now 2025, and let's make sure we make this year another great time for the channel, and I hope you all keep continuing supporting my videos and content. So, starting off, if you remember from my last video of 2024, I stated that I officially now have a PlayStation 5, meaning I can talk about any more games that isn't just Nintendo content while still talking about the things that I like. So, why not start this year off with definitely one of my favorite games that I've seen a lot of people praise, and I see why now, being Insomniac's Spider-Man franchise, especially with its third iteration coming pretty soon, obviously being known as Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 will be the last installment of the trilogy, which is dubbed as the final chapter, and the thing about Spider-Man 3 is that it will likely take a good while for this game to come out, given the fact that after Spider-Man 2 came out, the roadmap for DLC was leaked, and the entirety of Insomniac was leaked as well, especially since there was also going to be a Wolverine game being made by Insomniac, and the gameplay has already been leaked. Spider-Man 3 it will take a good while, and the DLC for Spider-Man 2 was fully cancelled because of it. So while we are waiting for this third game to come out, I thought, why not, talk about and predict what could likely happen next, what story it will be featuring this time, what character arcs we'll be seeing, and probably some potential DLC to kind of keep the game rolling before Insomnia does another series. Who really knows? But Spider-Man 3 has a lot of potential to be a good game, especially since I think despite Spider-Man 2 being one of my favorite games of all time, I do want to say that some parts of it felt rushed, and I do hope for Sony to kind of give Insomniac a lot of time to cook with this third installment. So let's kind of get started with what could likely happen next for Spider-Man 3, and more so just predictions of what could happen in the game. So in the second game, this one wasn't focusing on two major villains, that being the symbiote villain Venom and Kraven the Hunter. Kraven mostly got a lot of screen time, while Venom, unfortunately, while it's being one of my favorite comic book villains, didn't really have that much time to shine, but he definitely lasted a lot of good impact in the final act. But still, Spider-Man 3 would likely focus on two specific villains, that being Norman Osborn and Dr. Octopus, who is the main villain from the first game. The thing with Dr. Octopus here is that he says that this is going to be the final chapter, meaning that he is likely going to return to team up with Norman Osborn, who now has a true hatred against Spider-Man after turning Harry into a vegetable. So maybe the story would likely focus on Norman and Dr. Octopus now teaming up to fight off against Spider-Man. And since Dr. Octopus personally knows Peter's identity, then this would likely be a huge whiplash for Norman, especially since Harry and Peter were like the two best buddies that we have. Speaking of Peter Parker, here we have Peter's current situation. A lot of people kept saying that given the fact that Peter is now semi-retired from being Spider-Man and now having Miles Morales be the new Spider-Man of New York, then some would likely think that Peter won't be playable. But I don't really think that's a good idea. The thing with Peter Parker and Spider-Man 3 is that while he is semi-retired, I would think that he would somehow get forced back into the Spider-Man crime action because of Norman and Dr. Octopus. That really makes sense, because why exactly would you not have Peter Parker be playable? It made sense for Miles Morales, that game, but not really having Peter Parker be another focus, and not having him be the main focus for the villain's goal to begin with, because doesn't really make sense, especially since those two villains have a huge vendetta against Peter. So while he is semi-retired, I don't really think it's a good idea to not make him playable. I know the developers stated somewhere that Miles would now be like the new face of New York Spider-Man and all that, which I do appreciate Miles being there and all that, but I don't really think him wouldn't be the same without Peter Parker being playable, especially with the two villains I kept mentioning. Then there's characters like Harry, who currently his situation is in a bit of a strange and vague term, because he is currently in like some type of coma, but the symbiote was like the only way he was being kept alive at all, and given the end of the game, he's kind of at a coma. It's unsure whether or not he would stay alive, especially since Norman was like making a cure in order for Harry to keep on going without this terminal disease that is on him. So depending on how Insomniac could be, I would think that there is kind of a chance that Harry would likely come back. I'm not entirely too sure about Mary Jane, though, because I kind of feel like her entire character arc was fully complete, but I do think they might have some cases to put her as a sort of focus, and given the fact how they improved the MJ missions from the first game and now make them pretty well done in the second, I do really enjoy some of these, even though some parts of the MJ missions were annoying. I do enjoy some of it, but I'm not really too sure what could Mary Jane would honestly have. Probably have some type of situation where she encounters Dr. Octopus and Norman Osborn, but then there was also the most notable character that appeared at the post-credits of the game. Cindy Moon, who, for those comic book fans and Spider-Man fans, may know as Silk. This right here is confirmed that we are going to get this game's and this series' own version of Silk. And I can't really recall if Silk has been in like any other game aside from like mobile games, so I am kind of curious to see how Cindy would be handled here, or just Silk, really, because given the fact that the end confirms that Miles' mom is in a relationship with her dad, then I would like to see a bit of that step-sibling relationship, having to see these two grow and bond together. And it makes me kind of curious how Cindy would even get the Spider-Man powers, or even like get any of the web slinging. It's definitely going to be interesting to see, especially how they tease her at the very end. So yeah. Now, the thing is that if we want Cindy to work, then there may be a game that could be very similar to Miles Morales, a game that was focusing on the character. Now, I'm not really too sure how that would work for Silk at all. Just have a game called Spider-Man Silk and then focus in the story of Silk as a character and to kind of see her progress as Spider-Man. Because as I said, we only saw her for like a brief moment and nothing else, but it could definitely be an interesting way. The only difference is that we got to see Miles obtaining the spider powers during the first game, and then we get to see him progress in this one. So if anything, I think it's best to not have a Miles Morales-esque game, because I don't really know what they could really pull off with this one, especially since we had to talk about the villains that would be featuring in this one. Now, aside from Dr. Octopus, who would likely make a return, Norman Osborn now pretty much having a huge hatred against Spider-Man after what happened in the second game would mean that we would finally get to see one of Spider-Man's most formidable foes yet, the Green Goblin. And it's finally time we get to see it. Norman and Oscorp has been like a huge main part of the first two games for a good while now, that I think it's time for the Green Goblin to finally appear. And it's really going to be interesting to see how Norman would transform into it. And the thing when it comes to villains in Spider-Man is that 4 of the Sinister Six have been fully murdered by Kraven, and Mr. Negative had a full-on redemption arc with Miles Morales alongside with it. So with Dr. Octopus and Norman Osborn being like the two big villains, and possibly in the third game, then it would really be cool to see the whole part of Green Goblin in there. But then there were some villains that I have to personally mention. First off was the Chameleon, who was Spider-Man's very first villain he'd ever fought, and has made a brief cameo in the second game as sort of like a side mission. The thing with the Chameleon and some other villains I will talk about is that, as I mentioned very, very early on, Insomniac had canceled its DLC after it was leaked, which would feature a lot of different stuff. For example, aside from the Chameleon, you would also feature characters like Beetle. Beetle was also meant to be a character to appear in Spider-Man's DLC, but wasn't able to with the DLC called Beetle Infestation. And the design is really cool, but I am kind of curious to see how they were able to implement her in the game, or implement the character at all. And then there's the most notable one that I have to talk about personally, Cletus Cassidy, otherwise known as Carnage. Carnage is one of my favorite villains, and really seeing how Cletus was handled in this game was pretty interesting, but the story, the Flame side story was very abrupt. Like, the way it ended was really abrupt, and it felt like there was going to be a lot of DLC. And funny enough, that was also part of the roadmap as well, but due to it, we weren't able to see its story fully complete. So the thing is, if Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus would be like the only main source of the characters as the main villains for the third game, then what would be see Cletus' role at all. Well, some say that Cletus would become Carnage, but some would like to predict that there is a likely chance we could see the Red Goblin, which is mostly just a Green Goblin slash Carnage fusion altogether, and I actually would think that to be a cool thing to see. I mean, heck, we got Scream in the second game. I don't really see an issue to have Red Goblin in this one, though I am kind of curious about the symbiote situation. In the second game's final act, the city of New York was fully infested with a lot of symbiote. And in the Flame mission specifically, Cletus Cassidy has a vial of the symbiote after the end of the Flame story. So what exactly happened to that specific symbiote? Because after we defeated Venom, all of the symbiote had fully disintegrated. So does that mean the one Cletus had still is intact, or does it really not matter anymore? That's kind of a weird thing I have to mention. And speaking of, that's actually another thing I want to mention about the story. You see, given the fact that Peter Parker still has some parts of the symbiote suit, or more so some parts of the symbiote in him, making and creating the anti-Venom suit, I am kind of curious to see if some part of the symbiote is still going around in this third game. Because wouldn't it really kind of not make sense to just not have the anti-Venom suit at all and just, you know, kind of ignore it? Because especially with Cletus's case, where we don't really know what happened to it. Because without the DLC being canceled, man, we would have likely saw Carnage come into this game. So really, with Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus being like the main helm, I feel like Carnage would be a very interesting way of adding him, especially with how abrupt the characters was. And we like to see other characters appear as well, like Black Cat and Yuri, also known as Wraith. And I'm not really entirely too sure about the other characters like Tombstone and Mysterio, as I feel like their entire arcs were completed. I mean, Mysterio didn't really have an arc in the first game, but he does appear in this one with a main side quest. But that's all I could really say about my predictions for Spider-Man 3. Definitely one of my most interesting videos to talk about, especially since Spider-Man's one of my favorite villains and one of my favorite comic book characters and superheroes of all time. But as I mentioned before, it will take a while for this third game to come out, especially. But I do hope that when the story ever gets foretold, I hope Insomniac takes a lot of time with it, especially since the second game story felt a little rushed in some parts. But let me know your thoughts and opinions down below about this, and I hope you guys enjoyed my first PlayStation video of the year. I can't wait to talk more of this in the future, and I hope you guys enjoy what I have planned for 2025. And so with that, leave a like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell for more videos, follow my Twitter, and I'll see you guys next time. And remember this, once a legend, always a legend.